great to have you here and on Zoom as well. Just to let you know, we've got quite a large number of people at Adhisthana, a retreat centre, doing a Sangha retreat at the moment. About 35 Sangha members doing a retreat together at the moment. So they would otherwise ordinarily be at Sangha Night. So the numbers are slightly lower than they've been the last couple of weeks. But we can bear them in mind this evening. Hopefully they're bearing us in mind as well. And another announcement, we've bought a new part for the underfloor heating. So we're hoping by next Tuesday, the Great Hall might be warm. I can't guarantee that, but we've bought a new part. So we're hoping that it'll be working by next Tuesday. So bring your coat just in case, but hopefully it'll be nice and warm next week. Okay, so I'll begin this evening's talk. So we're having a series of talks. It's called Light in the Dark, and it's exploring how the Buddhist teachings give us a response to suffering, to dukkha, to suffering. So life lets us down. Life, in the way that we live it, doesn't always go how we expect, and we experience suffering. The Buddhist term for this is dukkha, and we translate it as unsatisfactoriness. It gets translated as suffering. The root of the term, it's a bit like an ill-fitting wheel. So if you imagine, like in the Buddhist time, they had chariots and there's a bumpy wheel. So life, as we live it, feels a bit bumpy, a bit rocky. Or it's like there's a stone in your shoe. It doesn't satisfy us. There's something missing, something wrong with life. So we've been exploring what tools does Buddhism, what is the Buddhist response to this situation? There is dukkha. And what does Buddhism say we can do about it to practice and to liberate ourselves from suffering? So we all experience dukkha. I mean, we know this truth. We know this truth. So at the moment, this particular dukkha of, having to wear face coverings in the Great Hall is dukkha. Like, I would love to be able to see people's faces. It's uncomfortable to have to wear masks. We're having to, particular dukkha at the moment. My mum and dad have been isolated with COVID, and they've been finding that tough in the last week, and lots of people have had lots of dukkha in particular over the last time. So it's like a topical theme to look at. How do we respond to difficulty, to dukkha? But there's also just the dukkha of life, regardless of a pandemic. There's just things that are unsatisfactory all the time. So last week I bumped my car. I had an upset tummy. I had a disagreement with my family members, and there's difficult neighbours. There's like things go wrong. There's just, life is full of difficulties, and Buddhism is very practical. It explains to us in a way why we suffer and what we can do about it, and that's what we're looking at with these talks, this series of talks. So we're looking at the Buddhist response to dukkha, to suffering, in 4 ways. So the last 2 weeks we've been looking at the wisdom approach. Then this evening and next week, we're going to look at what we're calling the heroic approach. And then we're going to have some talks on the compassionate approach. And then we'll end with what we're calling the hardcore or hardline approach. So we'll see what that looks like in a few weeks. So we've been, and what I would say is there's not like there's different approaches. They're just different aspects of the same response. Buddhism has a response to suffering, and we're just looking at different aspects of that same response. So in the different talks, you hear that they overlay with each other. So we heard in week 1 from Bodhisattva that the central wisdom teachings about dukkha, the 3 lakshanas, which we heard about on the introductory course and newcomers course, that there is dukkha, there is suffering, and there's the 4 noble truths which tells us about the truth of dukkha, and the root, the cause of dukkha and the root out of dukkha. And we heard about the Eightfold Path, that if we follow, liberates us from suffering. But Daniel talked about how our usual approach is to try and control life so we don't suffer, to try and avoid discomfort, to chase after pleasure. And we get angry when life doesn't meet our expectations. But if we can start by just accepting the truth of dukkha, that's a big step forward. We heard about in week 1. Then last week we heard from Subhadramati, another wisdom approach, she told us about an example of one of Sangharakshita's teachers called Dujom Rinpoche. And Sangharakshita had said that Dujom Rinpoche just had a real stillness about his being. It's like his being was completely still. And the usual winds or forces that agitate the mind or blow the mind about had been completely stilled, it seemed like, with his teacher, Dujom Rinpoche. And she evoked that really powerfully. And she told us about the Buddhist list of the 8 worldly winds, these 4 pairs of winds that agitate the mind, as if the mind is a lake and the surface of the mind gets agitated and blown around by these pairs of forces, these winds of pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, and fame and infamy. And we get agitated if we don't get what we want, we think life, our story of life is we expect to get pleasure, we expect to get things to be praised, and when we don't get those things, our mind is agitated. So we get blown around by these worldly winds. So, yeah, as a transition into the heroic approach this evening, I want us to look at an image of another being. So Caroline is helping us out with the text. She's going to put up on the screens an image of the Buddha Akshobhya. So the Buddha Akshobhya is another being who is completely calm, completely still, and he's a blue Buddha, and he is seated on a lotus in a mountain scene above a kind of very still ocean, very still body of water. And he is associated with the sun at dawn, which is very clear. So his perspective, it's the wisdom perspective, which is very clear, see things very, very clearly. And his name means unshakable. So he's unshakable like a mountain. And that's the title of tonight's talk, is Like a Mountain, solid like a mountain. His name means unshakable. And yeah, the image of the mind as being like a deep ocean with these depths, these unfathomable depths. And it's a very powerful image for the mind. And Akshobhya, his mind is completely still, and he's reaching down with his hand and just touching the earth, or touching the ocean in this instance. And for me, that's a clue as to his unshakability. It suggests for me that he's connected to these vast depths. Anyway, there's these vast depths to the mind of an enlightened being, and they're completely still. And the depths of our being, the depths of our mind, usually include our emotions and our volitions. And that's what I want to talk about this evening is, well, how do we cultivate a kind of Buddhist response to dukkha with our emotions? That includes our emotions and our volitions. What does that look like, and why is it heroic to do that? And the answer is a quality called Kshanti. It's spelled K-S-A-N-T-I, Kshanti. And the literal translation is patience or forbearance. And that's what I'm going to focus on this evening. It's a quality, it's a practice of patience and forbearance. I'm just going to read you a definition, really, an explanation from our teacher, Sangha Night. Kshanti is one of the most beautiful words in the whole vocabulary. I can't say that word. The whole vocabulary of Buddhism. It's one of the most beautiful words in the whole vocabulary of Buddhism. And it links a number of associated meanings, so there's no one English word which can do it full justice. It literally means patience or forbearance, and it's the antidote to anger. And it includes the absence of the desire for revenge and the absence of anger. And Kshanti has overtones of love, compassion, tolerance, acceptance, and receptivity. So yeah, he says it's one of the most beautiful words in the Buddhist vocabulary. Patience and forbearance is what it literally means, but it's got overtones of love and compassion. So yeah, our usual response to dukkha, as I've mentioned, is we try and control our life so we don't suffer, so we don't encounter pain, and we get as much pleasure as we can. And when if you had an experience of doing this, it doesn't really work. We can't control the world. We can't make it how we want it to be all the time. It's just impossible. And there's a teacher, Shantideva, I'm going to draw upon a lot this evening. He likened this to trying to cover the whole world in shoe leather to avoid our feet coming into contact with difficult experiences, painful experiences. So in the time of Shantideva in India, people would walk about barefoot and they'd come into contact with all kinds of different surfaces. Some of them would be pleasant, some of them would be unpleasant. And trying to control that so you never experience pain would be like trying to cover the whole world in shoe leather. It's just ridiculous. Our mind and we come into contact with all kinds of different experiences. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are painful. These are the worldly winds. We can't control it. We can't control our experience, but we try to. That's what we think we should do with life. And it's ridiculous, really. It's like trying to cover the surface. the world in shoe leather. Yeah, and what happens is there's two problems, at least two problems with this response, trying to control pain and pleasure and dukkha. One is that we inevitably get blown off course. We might make a decision about something we want to do with our life, but it might involve discomfort. And then if it's going to involve discomfort, we're not going to be able to do that because we're going to be avoiding that. So if we make our life about avoiding discomfort or chasing pleasure, when the worldly winds blow, they blow us off course. We end up blown off course from what we wanted to do. And then the other thing is we become weak. We become weak and vulnerable if we always try and avoid discomfort, avoid pain. Or when we experience like a really big event in our life, we won't have any kind of capacity to deal with it. We become weak. So the Buddhist response is to develop a robust mind, a robust, strong mind that can respond to whatever life throws at us. In a way, we can't control the outer events of the world, but we can control our response and we can control our mind and our heart, and that's how we alleviate suffering. And Shantideva said, well, that's like, instead of trying to cover the whole surface of the world in shoe leather, that's like wearing a pair of sandals, because that protects your feet. So if we could develop a robust mind, that protects our mind, that protects us from suffering. And that's this quality of Kshanti that we're going to explore this evening. But why is it heroic? Well, I'll come to that in a second. With the practice of Kshanti, we can start to see adversity as a test or a challenge. We can see adversity as an opportunity. So when life lets us down, or another person lets us down, and we get hurt by life or hurt by another person, it's an opportunity to be heroic, because we can use that as a challenge we can test our response of love and metta in that instant, and we can use it as an opportunity to develop a stronger mind, a stronger, more robust mind. And it's a heroic approach, Kshanti. It's heroic because it involves us bearing the pain and discomfort, turning towards it and experiencing it, not trying to avoid it, not trying to run away from it. And it means part of accepting the truth of dukkha means that we're going to experience it, dukkha. We're going to not avoid it, but just feel it. And it hurts. It hurts when life seems to let us down. It hurts. It's painful. And it hurts when other people let us down. But if we can accept it and we can experience the hurt, that's heroic, actually, and hopefully can explain to you this evening why we'd want to do that, why that's heroic. So Kshanti involves our emotions and our volitions, and it involves feeling dukkha and bearing it, being able to bear dukkha, being able to bear pain. Because if we want to set our mind on something and achieve it, we need to be able to bear discomfort. We need to be able to experience discomfort and not shy away from it. Sometimes things will be hard. Sometimes things will be difficult. So it's heroic to be able to bear that, not be blown about by those worldly winds, and to stay on course when things get tough. So we can become more solid like a mountain. We can become unshakable if we develop this quality of mind of Kshanti. So we're not blown about by the winds. We can just stay calm, but also stay on course and achieve our goal. So in this text, Shantideva, I've mentioned, is a historic teacher of Buddhism from the 8th century. And he wrote a very, very famous text called the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And a Bodhisattva, you could say, is a heroic Buddhist. They're a being who've got all their energies devoted to enlightenment, to awakening, and to alleviating suffering, not just for themselves, but for all beings. It's the ideal of the compassionate approach to Dharma, to Buddhism. And Shantideva wrote a guide to this way of life, to this approach to Buddhism, a guide to the Bodhisattva path. And there's a whole chapter on Kshanti, the whole chapter on the cultivation and practice of Kshanti, being able to bear difficulty. And what I want to do is just in a way give a bit of a commentary on what Shantideva says as how to practice this, how to cultivate this. So Shanti Deva says, well, it's an antidote to ill will. Ill will is the most destructive state. Shanti Deva says anger, ill will is the most destructive state. And Kshanti is the best ascetic practice. So traditionally, there's three contexts, three ways that we cultivate and practice Kshanti, this forbearance. So one is just with material things, with outer events, things in the world, material things. So that could be the weather. We don't like what the weather is, and this is quite commonplace. We don't like it when it's too cold, so I don't like it's too cold in the Great Hall, so I'm complaining about it. But if it was too warm, I'd be complaining about that as well. If it rains too much, it's too sunny. Somehow our happiness depends on these outer events that we can't control. So through Kshanti, and Kshanti Deva encourages, we can free ourselves from dependence on outer events. And there's a beautiful quote. There's a lot of my favourite quotes come from this text, and one of them is, he says two things. Whatever happens to us, even if we fall into adversity, we should not allow this to disturb our happy minds. And he says, why be unhappy if we can do something about it? And what's the use of being unhappy about something we can't do anything about? I just love the kind of the clear wisdom of that, the simple wisdom of that. I'm going to say it again. Why be unhappy if we can do something about it? And what's the use of being unhappy about something we can't do anything about? So there's just, I just love the wisdom that helps us to accept the difficulty of life. Life will have difficulties. We can't control it. Why be unhappy about it? And if we can do something about it, we'll do something about it. We don't need to be unhappy. So Shanti Deva says we can train ourselves to tolerate pain and discomfort. And we can train ourselves to do this, and then we can build a capacity to be able to withstand greater and greater challenges. So he says, well, we can start by learning to tolerate slight discomforts, and then even great pain becomes bearable. So he talks about, in his time, the discomfort of bugs, fleas, mosquitoes, hunger and thirst, which is probably more relevant for him. We don't, usually a lot of us won't experience hunger and thirst, but he will have done. Itches, rashes, we probably experience those. Now, if we can tolerate minor discomforts, we build capacity. I was thinking about ways we might do this. A friend of mine was telling me this week that he was fasting. Actually, I've heard two people saying that they practice fasting on some days. I can't imagine doing that. I kind of can't imagine just being hungry and having to bear that and not eating. Like, that seems too challenging for me. But friends of mine, well, they're doing that partly because they want to lose weight, and it seems a good way to do that, partly because they wanted to just change their relationship to food, actually. But for me, maybe something more practical. Could I not have the last bit of cake at Sangha Night, or not just, not have the bun, just allow somebody else to have that? I know that there's discomfort there. I'm not going to have it. Can you endure just small difficulties and then build capacity to endure stronger difficulties through doing that? Thinking about the weather, I was remembering when we put the trees in. I don't know if people have seen the remembrance garden at the back with the yew hedge. And there's probably about, 6, 7, 8 of us. Kevin's nodding, he was there on the time of the day. I think Machivasa was there. It was a day when it was all the weathers you can imagine happened on that day. And it's a small bunch of us trying to plant maybe 60, 70 yew trees in a hedge. And we weren't making much progress to start with. It seemed like we're getting very far, very quickly. And then it started to hail. There was like real gale force winds that seemed to be blowing the trees down. Then it was sunny, then it was like lashing down with rain. But there's something we seemed to, almost like it felt heroic. We were determined to plant the trees and not give in. And it almost like there was a kind of look of like exhilaration on people's faces. People still talk about it, smile about it. The day we planted the yew trees and all that kind of adversity. So we can learn to tolerate this, the discomfort of the material world, and the fact we don't control it, we can't control it. And then there's our bodies. The second thing we can practice with is our body: illness, sickness, pains, aches, discomfort. So last week I had a really bad backache. It really hurt to put weight through my hip and to walk. It's gone now. It's a fantastic relief, but yeah, it's really unpleasant last week. We get headaches, we get fevers, we get new coughs, repetitive coughs, and have to take lateral flow tests. Our bodies get ill and sick, and some people experience a lot of pain with their body a lot of the time, and luckily I don't, but some people do. And what we do with our mind can either make it bearable or unbearable. Actually, there's the kind of experience of the pain that we dealt with. It's possible to bear that, or to make it unbearable through our response. And people who teach mindfulness for people with chronic pain, they teach about being able to turn towards the pain and just experience it. And that makes it bearable. That is just about bearable. But they're trying to fight it and have a story about, well, this is unfair, this shouldn't be happening, anxiety, turning away from it makes it unbearable. And the Buddha had a metaphor for this. He said, well, our dukkha is like being shot with an arrow. And all the stories we tell ourselves about why it shouldn't be happening is like shooting ourselves with a second arrow, which is completely unnecessary. Like we could just get rid of the first arrow and don't put the second one in. And this is what we do when we experience dukkha, particularly with the body. We can make it, we can get into all kinds of mental states about it, which just make it less pleasant, less bearable. But we can learn just to be ill, really, just accept being ill, let our body do what it needs to do to recover. And it's actually much less unpleasant when we can learn to do that. It can become more tolerable. And there's a picture of an older member called Dharma on the shrine. And for me, he really typifies this practice of Kshanti, the forbearance with the body. He died maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but as long as I knew him for about 10 years. And he was an older member for a lot of that time. He was close to death. He had a kind of debilitating lung condition. And the doctors gave him maybe a couple of years to live, but he kept living and living and living. And his name he was given was protected by the Dharma, because his doctors couldn't understand why he hadn't died. He just kept living, really. But he almost seemed like he was about to die, but he never did. But the thing about him was not so much his body and his health, which was really bad, was his such positive state of mind. He was always cheerful. He never complained about his health. Like other people, I would get embarrassed sometimes because I'd complain about a backache or headache or whatever, but he was in this really difficult physical situation, but just never complained about it, always just got on with it. And whatever energy he had, he gave it to the Sangha. He would lead meditation. Sometimes he had a tube, putting medication into his heart, but he would just wrap his pump up in a blanket and then ring the bells for meditation. He just got on with it, really, without complaining. Just very, very positive, cheerful state of mind. So he's, for me, a real example of what can be achieved with this practice of patience. It's not just a passive accepting of things, it's a real positive state of mind, of metta, of love, despite what life might throw at us, despite the pain, despite the difficulty. And that is heroic. That is a heroic response for me, being able to have that pain, but still respond with love, still respond with kindness. And this, for me, this brings us on to the third and maybe the most challenging area for me of practicing Kshanti is other people, the patience and forbearance of other people. And apparently John Paul Sartre, in one of his plays, said hell is other people. And Sangha said, well, heaven is also other people. But in our experience, like we can most need to practice patience when other people don't do what we want them to do, or they don't do what we would like them to do. And I was reflecting on this last week. I had a minor car crash. I basically bumped into the back of somebody. The sun was very low and I couldn't see properly, but I crashed into the back of somebody. And I was quite pleased with myself as to how easily I was very calm. I just, okay, well, that's happened, fair enough, I've crashed into somebody. So when things go wrong, I've kind of built up a practice where I'm reasonably good at just going with what happens and just accepting it. And I was able to be very kind to the lady I'd crashed into and, reassure her, help make sure she was okay. And it looked like there wasn't any damage really. Her car didn't have any damage to it. Mine had a bit of damage to it, but there wasn't any damage to hers. But she was shaken up and I was kind to her. So I was pleased with myself at how I'd dealt with that, really. That's a good test in a way. This is a good test of my metta and of Kshanti. But then I got a call from her solicitors in the afternoon asking me about the incident and what had happened and for my version of it. And I thought, and then my mind got into all kinds of stories. Oh, this isn't fair. That guy was really kind to her. There wasn't any damage to her car. Why am I getting a call from solicitors? What's she going to try and get out of the situation? And then I got really upset and irritated and frustrated, and it stayed with me for quite a few hours. I was just really upset at this other person hadn't been fair, hadn't been kind. There hadn't been any damage, and then they were kind of putting a claim in. So then I thought, so it's okay. I can just about accept when things don't go as I want, but when people don't do what I expect them to do, that's much harder. I find it much more difficult to maintain that equanimity, kindness when someone else doesn't do what I want to do. Particularly if it's a family member, one of my children, my wife. Like I find that harder to accept in a way that people can let me down. Life can let me down, but people aren't allowed to. This is an area where we can really practice, actually. It's, I think, that the most important and heroic aspect of dukkha is the dukkha of other people. And Shanti Davis gives us lots and lots of ways to practice with this. I'm going to just share those with you. Yeah, and I just want to visit a teaching from the Buddha. The Buddha taught the Karaniya Metta Sutta, the Sutta on loving kindness, and he gives a metaphor in there of a mother and a child. He says, well, the love we should try and develop for all beings is the same as a mother has for her child, her only child. And I was reflecting on this. I mean, I'm a father, I'm not a mother, I'm a father, so I've got, maybe a taste of this. And I imagine it could be much stronger for a mother, perhaps. But it's that, you just that love where you would bear anything. You put up with any kind of discomfort to look after them, for them to be happy. A mother will go without food, without sleep, basically, and still love their child, whatever they do, whatever gets thrown at them. And that's the kind of love that we're looking to develop in Buddhism. That's the goal. That's what we're aiming for. That's what metta ultimately can be. So, when people don't do what we want, that's a test of our metta. That's a challenge for us. Can we respond with kindness? Can we respond with metta, with patience? And there's a story of a Buddhist meditator, I think maybe a monk, maybe a lay person, but he had a servant and he'd been doing metta bhavana, and the servant came in, tripped over and spilt the tea, and he got scolded by the master who'd been doing his metta bhavana practice, scolded the servant for spilling the tea. And this kind of shows other people, that's the real test. We could be sitting down on a cushion feeling all kinds of loving emotion, but when somebody doesn't do what we want, how do we respond in that situation? That's the test. That is a challenge for us. And obviously we work with this in the fourth stage of the metta bhavana. So I think what I'll do is go through how we might work with this in the fourth stage of the metta bhavana, because that's our working ground. I mean, our working ground is everyday life, but we can really work on it in the metta bhavana. The metta bhavana is like the kind of gym for the heart. It's like we're going to train and work out our metta muscles. So how might we work with the fourth stage where we get the difficult person, the enemy, the person we don't like, who causes difficulty? Well, Shanti Davis says, well, beings are conditioned. Everything is driven by conditions, and so are other people, so are we. So he says, well, we don't get angry at indigestion, which is like a condition of the body. Other people, when they're unskillful, they're driven by conditions. Why do we get angry at them? He says, well, if someone hits us with a stick, we don't get angry at the stick, which is kind of driven by the person. But the person is driven by conditions and anger that they're not in control of. So why get angry with them when we don't get angry with the stick? So he uses it. For me, it seems that's quite a challenging metaphor, but the idea people are conditioned and they're not really in control of what they're doing. So in a way, why get angry with that? And then he says, well, beings themselves cause themselves all kinds of suffering, all kinds of harm through anger and craving. We take intoxicants, we have an unhealthy diet, we have unethical behaviour, all of this harms ourselves, causes ourselves suffering. So beings causing themselves suffering all the time through delusion. Of course they're going to cause harm to other people as well as themselves. How can you expect them not to harm other people if they're harming themselves? But he says, despite all of this kind of deluded behavior. Beings are in essence good. Beings are in essence good. So again, it's ridiculous to get angry at them because essentially beings are good. And then he says we can remember our own behavior. Have we ever done something similar to what this person has done? And then how can we get angry with them when we do the same thing? And I always think of an example of my car parking, terrible car parking one time when I was trying to drop the kids off at school and it was snowing. We were late and there's nowhere to park. And I was just getting more and more desperate. I couldn't find anywhere to park. The kids were late. So I just parked at the top of a junction, kind of knowing, I just kind of tried to ignore this was a bad place to park. And just, well, I'll go in really quickly, come out, and it'll be fine. And I kind of went in and it went fine, and I came out, forgotten really about where I parked, and then just saw this massive queue of cars stuck on this hill, another massive queue of cars stuck, people getting angry with each other because they couldn't get past each other. So I've caused this. This was me. I parked in this really stupid place. And I felt really, really stupid. And I kind of sheepishly tried to sneak into the car and drive off. But then I thought, okay, well now I can never get angry at somebody who drives in a silly way or parks in a foolish way because I've just done it. I've caused all kinds of people getting to work late, and kind of all kinds of arguments, all kinds of difficult mental states I've caused for them. I must remember this and never get angry with people. I think after a few weeks or months it faded and I forgot about it. Now I get angry with people, but today I remembered about it. So hopefully I can keep that in mind. I think I can't get angry with other people for driving badly or foolishly because I do the same thing. And then he says, well, when we fall foul of the worldly winds with other people, when we're kind of blamed for something unfairly or criticised, or when we lose something instead of gaining something, it's an opportunity for wisdom. It's an opportunity to see through the worldly winds. So, okay, we've lost our possessions, something is lost that we didn't want to lose. Well, you can't take your possessions with you when you die. What's the use of grasping onto them? We take our karma with us when we die. That's what we take with us. So it's much better to be concerned about our mind and what we do than the possessions that we've lost. And then he says, well, if our happiness is based on what other people think about us, we're kind of imprisoned by that. We're kind of shackled by something we can't control, what other people think about us. So when somebody criticizes us, that's an opportunity to be liberated from those shackles. Their criticism is presenting us with an opportunity to see through that, not be dependent on what people think about us. They're doing us a favor. If someone criticizes us, they're doing us a favor. It's an opportunity to practice. So basically, if you're in the fourth stage of the Metta-bhavana, we're doing the Metta-bhavana soon. Can you see the conditions that are driving this person? Ask yourself that question. Can you see the conditions that's leading them to behave in this way? Maybe it's causing them suffering acting in this way. That might be a reflection that takes away the anger. Can you see that in essence they are good? Does that help to take away the anger? Can you remember an occasion when you've done something similar? That might take away the anger. Could you even be grateful to them that they're weakening our attachment to status or possessions? Can we be grateful then for an opportunity to develop stronger metta in the fourth stage of the Metta-bhavana, to develop a more robust mind that will benefit us the next time we encounter difficulty? If them being a difficult person is giving us the opportunity to have a stronger, more positive mind, so we can even be grateful to them, which might sound an extreme practice, but these are the reflections that Shantideva gives us in the Metta-bhavana. Okay, so I want to just end again with an image, the image of Akshobhya and the image of touching the earth. This is maybe something else you can bring to mind in that instance to cultivate Shanti. Akshobhya isn't ruffled by the waves on the surface of the ocean. He isn't agitated by the worldly winds. He's touching the earth, touching, in this case, the ocean. And he's connected to this boundless mind, this boundless deep reserves of metta and volition. And for me, the other time we see the earth touching mudra is just when the Buddha's on the verge of enlightenment. The Buddha comes under attack, the historical Buddha, from all the forces of greed, hatred, delusion. And this is depicted mythically as an assault from an army, Mahara's army, who throws sticks, rocks at the Buddha, try and create fear in the Buddha. There's all kinds of hatred and anger towards the Buddha. But the Buddha's insulated by this aura of loving kindness and metta. And mythically in the story, all the rocks and stones just turn into flowers that fall at his feet. And this is the Buddha on the verge of enlightenment and protected by metta, by loving kindness. And he touches the earth in that instance, just again a symbol that had been connected to deep reserves, deep reserves. And yeah, I'm going to read from the Bhikkhani Metta Sutta just to end. So this is the Buddha's words on loving kindness. Meditate like this. May all living beings be happy and at peace. May they have a deep welling happiness. May all living beings, weak or strong, omitting none, tall, middle-sized or short, subtle or gross of form, seen or unseen, those near or far away, may every living being abound in bliss. May no person deceive another. May no person despise any other person whatsoever in any place. May they not wish any harm to one another out of anger or ill will. Just as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, bring forth an all-embracing loving mind. Bring forth unbounded love for all the world, above, below, across, in every way. Love unobstructed without enmity. Standing or moving, sitting or lying down, whatever you are doing, be free of laziness and wield this blessing power of mindfulness and boundless love. This is what the wise call abiding in the divine. Yeah, that's the challenge. Can we be heroic and always respond with a loving heart, or use those adversity, those difficult people and moments to cultivate a more loving heart? Okay, so on Zoom, you'll be allocated into your groups by Carlisle. And in the